Happy Thursday, everybody! We don't care about Thursday night football. We have a great show lined up. The Motor City Mad Mouse Show. What the boomer, 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 and the Motor City Mad Mouse Show. Don't get any better than this on a Thursday night. Pleased to be joined by my longtime colleague Barry Bloom. Thanks for being on, Barry. Always wanted you on. Now we made it work, and so glad to have you. Get ready for a great show. This is going to be a wild show with the boomer.
Thanks, Scott.
Thank you. All right. Anyways, Barry, let's talk about your career. I know you've been in it a while. Glad to go ahead and see Cyberuski in the chat room. But let's talk about your career. I know you've covered a lot of major sports. So let's talk about some of your biggest moments in the sports that you've enjoyed. I know you've had a lot of them.
Well, I was thinking about, the top five or so World Series that I covered recently. But as far as baseball games concerned, I would still say the Bucky Dent game at Fenway in 1978 was still the best single baseball game I've ever covered. It was just an incredible game with an incredible amount of pathos. And I mean, to show you how crazy it was, I'm a lifelong Yankee fan, and I was sitting in the front row of Fenway Park for that game. And I'm like silently rooting for the Yankees. And you have all the stuff that's going on in that game. And so it ends with a foul pop by Yastrzemski. And I always kid Goose Gossage about this. He came in the seventh inning to save the seventh inning for Guidry, and then he had to save the eighth inning and the ninth inning for himself, which is unheard of. It would never happen in today's game. Even with the 3-batter rule, you need like a 9-batter rule to do something like that.
Right.
But during the COVID, and they were playing when baseball was down for those months, and everybody was playing the replays of the great games, I've just refused to watch them, except one day I found the Yankee Red Sox game, the Yankee telecast of the Yankee Red Sox game. So I go, okay, I'm going to watch the Bucky Dent game. And I turned it on just, as Dent hit the home run. And, Phil Rizzuto, which I don't even remember, I was watching the game, wasn't watching the game on television, but I didn't know that, Frank Messer and Phil Rizzuto are doing the game. And Phil Rizzuto went to the bathroom in the seventh, in between, the bottom of the sixth and the top of the seventh. And Messer was calling the game alone in the booth. And Dent hits the home run, and Rizzuto's not even there. He gets back into the booth, and he tells a story about him running back from the bathroom and missing one of the greatest moments in Yankee history, and running into Frank Malzone, a former Red Sox, and busting his chops about the Bucky Dent homer before he gets back into the booth. Yeah. So I'm watching this game, and I know exactly what's happening in that game. I could give you chapter and verse of the eighth and ninth inning. And then I'm just as nervous watching the replay of this game as I was that day when I was actually watching the live game. That's how crazy that game was. So that's my number one. My number two was Game 7, 1994, Madison Square Garden, Rangers and Canucks. The Rangers are going to the third period. They haven't won the Cup since 1940. All my life I've been waiting for the Rangers to win the Stanley Cup. I'm covering the game for Sport Magazine and writing a magazine article on the Rangers and that game.
Yeah.
And the thing goes into the third period. The Rangers have a 3-1 lead. And, they make it 3-2. They go into the last few minutes, and the Canucks hit the post like twice. And their Rangers are hanging on for dear life. And they get an icing call with like 2 seconds to go. And Pavel Bure has to face off against, I don't even remember who faced off for the Rangers. I don't think it was Messier. But Rangers won the face-off in front of Richter. It was flipped back over the blue line, and the Rangers won the Stanley Cup. That was probably the greatest moment of my sports life. So those two would be, even to this day, as many great moments and milestone things that I've covered. And look, I covered Pete's hit to beat Cobb, Barry's home run to beat Aaron, Hershiser's consecutive game streak to beat Drysdale, Ripken passing Gehrig on the all-time consecutive game played list, and you know 500 homers, 600 homers, 3,300 wins. I've covered 4 home runs in a game. I've covered just about everything except a perfect game. So I mean, I've had a couple of no hitters. So I mean, I've had really a blessed career and a blessed life.
Yeah, what Mark Messier did with the Rangers is just unbelievable. One thing to win in Edmonton, but to be able to be the captain of a team like him. I had Neil Smith on actually a few weeks ago, and he talks about what they had to do to build that team. But when you bring in a guy like Mark Messier, one thing what he did out in Edmonton, but to be able to do it on his own with his own team, so to speak, in New York and the Big Apple, to me is just anticlimactic.
Well, it was I don't think it was anticlimactic. I think it was super climactic. And
Okay,
remember, Messier won his last cup with the Oilers after Gretzky was traded to the Kings. So
right,
this wasn't new to him. And yeah, he
right,
didn't have the supporting cast of great players that he had, you know, Paul Coffey and all those guys
right,
that he had with the Rangers. But he had, you know, Leach and Richter and Adam Graves was brought in there.
right,
A lot of old Edmonton guys were brought in on that team along with Messier. And they, you know, every move they made and bringing in Mike Keenan to coach the team for the year, which
right.
Neil and him were at each other's throats, and Keenan walked out on the team after he won the cup. It's like every move they made contributed to them winning the cup because you know they survived you know game 7 against the Devils in the Garden in overtime, double overtime. You know, Howie Rose's called Mateau, 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 and then game 7 at the Garden, you know, against the Canucks, who are a very good team. You know, they needed every move they made, they had to make to win that cup. And here we are, so many years later, and they've only been back to the finals once.
Yeah, that speaks volumes, doesn't it? You're right.
I
When
mean,
you think about,
I
I'm
mean
sorry, go ahead.
The Panthers and the Lightning have won more cups than the Rangers. It's
Scary.
pathetic.
Yeah, scary thought. Yeah, that's a good point. You know, when we talk about Messi, then I want to talk about the Panthers and the Lightning because I know Joshua Door's in the chat room and he's a big hockey guy. He even mentions in the chat that Matt Kachuk is actually on college game day in Miami for the Hurricanes and the Gators this weekend. We'll be at that game on
And
Saturday
Kachuk's
night.
yeah, and Kachuk's like a kid of the guy who was on the Rangers. That was his father. He played center for the Rangers.
Right. So there you go. So yeah, but that's a great comparison. It really is. Like Mark Messi is one of those kinds of guys. You're right. He can, whether you have Gretzky or you don't, the impact of him in the dressing room and on the ice is just very, really strong and impactful for
Yeah,
sure.
he's like Jeter with the Yankees. These captains, the guys who just go to guys. You know, all they do is win. You know, they just know what it's like to pull a team together and win.
Right.
You know, Messier was one of them. Jeter's one of them. I think Judge's another one right now. Uh, you know that, and you know that's the nice thing about hockey. I mean, hockey traditionally every team has a captain. In
Right.
baseball, it very rarely happens. I mean, the Yankees have
Right.
had, you know, three or four of them going back to Gehrig. You know, Munson was one of them.
Hmm.
Then they didn't have another one after Munson died until Jeter, and they didn't have
Hmm.
another one after Jeter left until Judge. So I mean,
Right.
you know, but in baseball, you know, Buster Posey was the captain of the Giants when they won the 3 championships, and I
Right.
always asked Bochy why he didn't name him captain. And and Bochy would always, to this day, if I bust Bochy's, you know, balls about it, he basically will tell me we needed captain. I go, yeah, of course you needed a captain. You had Posey. Give me a break.
Hmm. So let me ask you. You talk about hockey in the late Sunshine State, and so it's a good point. The Florida Panthers been on a good run the last couple Stanley Cups. They won 2 in a row. The Lightning have done well. Are you surprised that hockey has succeeded as much as it has here in the Sunshine State?
Yeah, this is, you know, a story I've been wanting to do for a while. The comparative nature of how successful hockey has been in the state in comparison to baseball with the Latin population in Florida is mind boggling to me. I mean,
Yeah.
the last, what is it? 5 out of the last 6 years, either the Panthers or the Lightning have been in the Stanley Cup Finals.
Yeah.
And they've won. The only year the Lightning lost to the Avalanche. So I mean, they won 3 in a row. Now the Panthers have won 2 in a row. They get huge crowds. They outdraw both baseball teams in their arenas, and the baseball teams just don't draw. And the Rays are not a bad team. The Rays are a fun team, and they always are competitive. And you've got a beautiful ballpark in Miami. For the life
Yeah.
of me, I know people don't want to take the trip down and into Miami, along the traffic corridors to go to that game. But to
Right.
me, it's a great ballpark. It's a beautiful place to watch a game. That team is like 4.5 games out of the wild card right now. They came back from nowhere. They're like 7 or 8 games under 500 after a
Yeah.
terrible start. And what the Rays have had to go through this season, playing at Steinbrenner Field because the roof blew up the top, it's
Right.
amazing what they were able to accomplish this year. They were in the wild card race, and they're still on the fringes of it, despite playing an entire season basically on the road. Yeah, I don't know why it doesn't have any traction. I understand why hockey does. I mean, hockey, it's a fun sport. They put a lot of money into it. They've had success. They've got good arenas.
Right.
They were smart to move. The Panthers were smart to move out of downtown Miami to the burbs where they are. They've
Yeah.
got a fast fan base up there,
Hmm.
and Tampa. The Tampa team is on the Tampa side of the bay. It's not playing in St. Petersburg. So I mean, I don't think it's a secret why they're better, but it just is amazing to me that they've just gone absolutely bunkers over hockey in Florida as opposed to, baseball, which is really kind of a native sport.
Well, keep in mind though, the Panthers have been to the Stanley Cup Final 3 years in a row. They lost to Vegas and then they won back to back. So I guess that further enhances what you're talking about that they've done well. The stadiums in the respective areas, you're right. The Florida Panthers got it right in Sunrise, and Tampa. I've been to that arena as well. They did a good job with their downtown area for sure. I think that the Rays, and we'll probably get to this in a little bit, we're going to be fine when they move to the Tampa area because I am a graduate from South Florida. I've always meant that baseball should be played in Hillsborough County, not Pinellas. But that's something we'll get to in a little bit. So there's no question that, and you're right, Lone Depot Park is a beautiful ballpark. It is. I've worked out of that stadium the last so many years, and it really is a great place. Let's talk about the one of the big headlines of the day today, and that's Clayton Kershaw retiring. Why don't you give us some of your best recollections about Clayton Kershaw and talk about his career?
Well, there was a while there where, Kershaw's got what 220 wins, something like that, at this point, and there was a while there where he was below 200. Where I
Right.
even wrote a column years ago that uh, Kershaw, I'm not sure whether I would vote for him on the first ballot of the Hall of Fame. Now, considering the way pitching has devolved, there's no question I'll vote for him the first ballot of the Hall of Fame.
Okay.
But, he's been a horrible, postseason pitcher for them, which is part of the problem. If there was mostly ever a big game in the postseason, Kershaw would cough it up.
Right.
So, and when you look at great pitchers, they're at their best in the playoffs. Kurt Schilling was at his best in the playoffs. Whitey Ford at his best in the World Series. Randy Johnson at his best in the World Series. Only guys like Pedro and, Kershaw are not. But then you look at the overall body of the work and his overall ERA, his strikeouts. When he went over 3,000, that kind of cemented it. And I was in LA for the game where he recorded 3,000, and he had just come back, and he looked to me like he had absolutely nothing left. He could barely get the ball over the plate, and I think there was 19 or 20 pitches that were fouled off on a 2-strike count, and he basically came down to his last batter in the 6th inning and his 100th pitch to strike out, make and record his 3,000s against the White Sox before he hit. That was his last pitch of the game.
Yeah.
and he got recorded to 3,000. It was an incredible. The whole scene was incredible, and to be there to see him do it, that pushed me over. And then he just shocked me by he's had a really great comeback second half of the season. Since
Yeah.
he's back, it wasn't like, hey, I thought, wrap it up here and retire. You got your 3,000. You can't pitch anymore. Then all of a sudden, he's pitching and regularly winning games. I think he's won 7 or 8 games, and they
Right.
announced today his last home regular season game is tomorrow. I do
Right.
not see him starting in the postseason for the Dodgers. I mean, they've got Yamamoto and Snell, their top 2 pitchers. If they go to a wild card series, that's got to be their first 2 starters. They've got to like shit can Otani for the postseason. Somebody said about him going into the bullpen, you can't put him in the bullpen. That's totally impractical when he's a designated hitter. How do you get him out to the bullpen to warm up in any sort of situation when he
Right.
has to come up to bat at any point in time? So you send him out to the bullpen. His spot is like the 9th up. And then all of a sudden the Dodgers reel off 8 in a row. What are you going to do? Run him through the tunnels to get him up to hit? It's not going to work.
Right.
So, I mean, I think it was a stupid experiment for bringing him back to pitch. He's proven that he can do it. He had the no-hit 5 innings the other day. Leave it alone now for the rest of the postseason. But I think the Dodgers have, those 2 guys. They've got Glass now. They've got enough starters. Where Kershaw would be probably a 4th starter somewhere, if they went into a 7-game series and they needed a 4th starter. So I think
Yeah.
that's the only in the NLCS that would probably be, or the World Series as a number 4 starter. That might be the only place you'll see Kershaw pitch. And by the time you get to that, there'll be such a gap between his last start, which I think is next week on the road, and when he would pitch again in the postseason. It's hard to start him again unless you use him in a middle inning relief situation if one of your starters gets knocked out early, which you could do. But I think, tremendous pitcher, tremendous guy. I would, in Dodger history, as much as I saw Sandy Koufax when I was a kid. A lot of people compare him to Sandy because they're both left-handers, but Sandy had only 6 great seasons. Kershaw's had 18 seasons. He's the best left-handed pitcher and maybe the best pitcher in Dodger history. So I think when he goes, there'll be a lot to basically, for him to have accolades about, both on the national level and for the Dodgers. He's one of the Dodger all-timers.
You talked about Kurt Schilling. What prevents him from getting in the Hall of Fame?
Yeah, I just think it was one of those things with his politics. He just would never shut up, and
Right.
his regular season records are not stellar. They're kind of like in that range with Kershaw. And the thing that throws him over is that, he was like 10-4 or something in the postseason.
Right.
And I think that he got close in the Hall of Fame vote. And I know him, and I've talked to him at times about it. And I told him at the time, shut up. He complained about, he said, I didn't get into the Hall of Fame because the liberal sports writers wouldn't vote me in. And I go, you dumbass, I'm a liberal and I voted for you. You don't even know what you're talking about. Why
Right.
don't you shut up and stop alienating half the people who are going to vote for you? Can you do that? Can you keep quiet? And he told
Yeah.
me, I'm not going to do that. Okay, well, then you're not going to get into the Hall of Fame. And that's
Wow.
what happened to him. And now when he's in the Veterans Committee, he's not going to get 12 votes by out of 16 out of that group to get into the Hall of Fame. So basically he's done.
Wow, that's incredible. Let's talk about another guy who's actually aging well, Justin Verlander. For a while he got off to a slow start, but he's starting to pitch much better. And he's looking. Is there a chance he could probably play somewhere next year? What are your thoughts about what going on with Justin?
I just saw him here. He pitched against the Diamondbacks yesterday, and he pitched 7 innings of like 3 hit ball, no runs, 3 strikeouts, a couple of walks. Unfortunately, which has been his predicament all season, Brandon Pfaadt practically pitched a no hitter. The Diamondbacks never pitch a guy into the ninth inning. They haven't had a complete game in 334 straight games. And he went into the ninth inning, and the poor guy left with a one hitter, and Verlander left after seven. And this is just what he's run into with the Giants, because the Giants don't have, they're a streaky hitting team, and they
Right.
haven't really hit behind him. Even earlier in the season, he had an injury, he struggled a little bit, but every time he'd go 5 or 6 innings and hand the ball to the bullpen, he'd leave the leading 2-1, and the bullpen would blow the game. So it's just been that kind of season for him. I
Yeah.
know because I've written the story enough that he would love to get to 300. He went into the season at 262. Because of his hard luck this year, he's got 265. He might have another start, maybe two left. So he's going to go into next season still needing like 35 wins to get to 300. He's 42. Is it possible? Sure. But he can't have another season like this one. And yeah, he said yesterday, I asked him, do you want to come back? And he goes, well, sure. He goes, well, what about here or where else? And he goes, I don't know. He goes, well, unfortunately, it's not up to you. Okay, what do you mean it's not up to me? Yeah, somebody's got to offer you a contract. And I think somebody will offer him a contract. But I
Hmm.
think he would be crazy to go back to the Giants. I think the Giants are crazy to re-sign him. Why would you go through all that again? But I think if I were the Yankees, I'd sign him. If I were the Astros, I'd re-sign him. If I
Hmm.
were the Dodgers, I might pick him up. Even the Padres for a year, for 12 or 13, which is he made this year. So
Right.
yeah, he's one of the old timers for me. And of all the pitchers who are going to come up, and the starting pitchers are going to come up in this era with Hall of Fame credentials, there's only a few. Him, Scherzer, and Kershaw are the three. Kershaw should be the first up because the other two are still pitching. Verlander is a slam dunk first ballot guy.
Great stuff. Well, great segue too. So, do you see any of the steroid users making it to the Hall of Fame? Because I've heard a lot of different comments that they should just have a wing or just put them somewhere else, and we all know who they are, But you have
You know,
Barry.
uh, Basically, you just had the president weigh in on Roger Clemens after he played golf with him and say
Right.
that Roger Clemens deserves to be into the Hall of Fame, but
Right.
he didn't mention Barry Bonds or Sammy Sosa. So, I my feeling about it is this: none of them are going to get 12 votes on these committees. And the way the thing is stacked now is that you can go on the committee twice, and if you don't get 12 votes, you can never go on the committee again. Used to
Really.
be you could go on and ad infinitum. Those guys have already been on the committee once because it's a new rule. They're being grandfathered in. They have two more shots of it. I don't see how either they or Pete Rose get into the Hall of Fame with those committees. But, saying all that, I think at somewhere down the road, when there's different leadership in the hall, and it could be 10 years, 20 years after we're all dead, and they're all dead, like Pete,
Mhm.
that there's a
Right.
committee that, like the Negro League committee, that gets assembled and says, let's look at these steroid guys. Let's look at Palmiero and Sammy and all the numbers that they put together, and let's revisit this and put them into the Hall of Fame. There shouldn't be a steroid wing. That's stupid. If
Right.
you want to put, there's also a difference between the guys who were suspected of doing steroids and the guys like A-Rod who were actually caught and
Right.
suspended. You had Braun, you had A-Rod, you had a number of guys who might have been Hall of Fame caliber who were suspended, and that's a completely Manny Ramirez was suspended twice. I mean,
Right.
you that and the fact that you think Barry Bonds' head swelled up during that era to twice its size when there's no evidence of that is
Right.
different than a guy who has gotten caught. So I think all of this has to be looked at and revisited, and it's going to be done by a special committee somewhere down the road. What probably Jane Forbes Clark, who's the chairperson, who I love and respect, but I do believe that when she's going to have to be gone, and the board of directors of the hall are going to have to reevaluate this under more enlightened leadership and form a committee to get it done. But it's a while away.
So when you talk about Barry Bonds, let's face it, he had a chilly relationship with the media too, so that didn't help his case out any, did it?
Well, look, Barry didn't have a chilly relationship with me, and to this day, he's still one of my best friends as a player.
Right.
So, there were chosen guys. Bob Nightingale was another one he had a good relationship with. He had his guys. It was the day-to-day guys who asked him questions that he thought were stupid, that he just didn't really want to. He didn't give much time to. But there
Okay.
are plenty of guys like that who've gotten into the Hall. Eddie
Right.
Murray never gave anybody the time of day, and he was
Right.
a first ballot Hall of Famer. Same thing with Steve Carlton, who never talked to the media. I mean, that's not the criteria for whether you should be in the Hall of Fame or not.
Right.
You have the numbers or you don't have the numbers. And there's no better hitter that I've seen in my lifetime but Barry Bonds. The other two that are close, who I saw a lot, is Mickey Mantle and Tony Gwynn. And, I'm not short shifting Hank and Willie. They were great hitters, but I didn't see much of their career. I'm only going by the people I saw live for a good part of my life. And I covered all of Tony's career and a good portion of Barry's career. And I saw Mantle a lot when I was a kid at the stadium. Those are the greatest hitters I've ever seen. There's no argument with it. The three greatest statistical seasons of all time are Babe Ruth in 1920 when he had 59 home runs and won should have won the Triple Crown. He batted 370. He had 175 or something RBIs, and he didn't win the Triple Crown batting 370 because Harry Howman of the Tigers batted 390. And in 1956, Mantle did win the Triple Crown. And a lot of people are comparing him now to Cal Riley because he just broke Mantle's record as a switch hitter, which was set in 1956. But for Christ's sake, Mantle batted 350 that year. Cal Riley is batting 240. Give me a break. I'm not comparing Cal Riley with Mickey Mantle. That's the
Right.
second greatest season. And the
Right.
third is 2004 with Barry when he led the league in hitting, hit 45 home runs, drove in 70 to 80 runs, never saw a pitch to hit,
Right.
walked 230 times or 32 times, 120 intentional, which are both records that are never even going to be close again, and actually who was on base more than the at bats he had in that season. Nobody's even close to that kind of stuff. And whether you think Barry did it because of performance enhancing drugs, okay, so be it. But he told me two things, which I'll never forget. He said he knew whether the pitch was going to be a ball or a strike before it even left the pitcher's hand. That's
Really?
number one. Number two, he said he only got three pitches to hit in a game, and he still hit his home runs. The guy walked almost 2,500 times in his career. If
Wow.
you had cut that in half, he would have had 900 home runs.
Wow.
2,500 times, that's like 5 full seasons of at bats. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Nobody else, Babe Ruth, nobody. They don't do it with Judge. They're just starting to walk him intentionally, but not at the rate they walk Barry. It's just what was going on in that era. And he was like 39 years old when they were doing it.
Right.
In the 2002 World Series, Mike Scioscia walked him like 7 times intentionally. They were walking him with runners on first, with runners on first and second. It didn't matter. Didn't have to be a base open for them to walk him. And he still hit 400 in that World Series. The guy's a great player, and he's being cast unfairly as the villain of the whole steroid era. And I will say a lot of it is what you said. His reaction to the people that he was dealing with on a day-to-day basis, but he liked to play angry. And I'll tell you a quick story before we go on
Sure.
to the next thing.
Hmm.
Tony Gwynn and Barry were really close friends. There was no
Really?
nicer guy than Tony Gwynn. So
Okay.
when they were kids and Barry was playing in Pittsburgh, Tony was taking batting practice at Three River Stadium, and Barry was busting his ass and saying, "Tony, how come you don't hit more home runs?" And he goes, well, I'm trying to get base hits, blah, blah, blah. Tony thought when he got into the league, all he cared about, he wanted to get the 3,000 hits. And he thought if he pulled the ball and hit home runs, he wouldn't get the 3,000 hits, which he
Okay.
later admitted was proven wrong to him while he watched Barry and, Ted Williams talk to him about it. But
Okay.
Barry grabbed his bat, which was a tiny bat, and said, "Let me see that bat." And Barry took a bat, stepped into the batting cage, and hit home runs all over Three River Stadium in batting practice with that bat. And
Yeah.
handed it back to Tony and said, "Don't give me any of this bullshit." Number two, during a year when they were both mature players and Barry's with the Giants already, and Tony was in the middle of winning his 8 batting titles. That Tony asked Barry, why do you act like this? You're such a schmuck. Why do you do this? And he goes, well, Tony, blah, 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 blah. I like to play angry. That was always his excuse. So Tony said, look, we're going to the All-Star game next week. Watch me and do what I do. So they went to the All-Star game. People were around Tony. Tony was doing interviews. People were around Barry. Barry was affable in doing interviews because he could have done it. He's a smart and affable person. He's a very smart person and a very good interview when he wants to be.
Okay.
So they get through the All-Star game, and now the second half of the season starts. And Barry is like trying to carry it over to act like Tony acts with the writers. And he goes like over 15 or 18. And his teammates are going, what are you doing? Why are you acting this way? We want the old Barry back so you can start hitting again. So the old Barry got back. He started hitting again. So later in the season, Tony sees him. They're playing the Padres. And Tony asks Barry, Barry, what happened? And Barry says to Tony, I'm sorry, Tony, I can't do what you do.
That is funny. I'll give you this. So when you mentioned the amount of walks that Bonds amassed, that says an awful lot. Doesn't matter whether you're taking anything or not, just to be able to, the intimidation factor is surreal that you didn't want to go ahead and face a guy because you're afraid of the long ball. You're right. Those are incredible records that most people don't even think about.
I always argued, with the managers at the time. But Bochy was the only guy who pitched to him. And consequently, he hit more home runs against the Padres than any team in Major League Baseball.
Right.
But, when I asked Bochy why he pitched to him, he goes, if we can't get Barry out in these situations, we're not going to be able to do shit if we get to the playoffs. Yeah. So, but every other manager, Jim Tracy, Bob Brenly, you could go down the list from that era. And I'd ask him, why do you walk Barry all the time? It's it's not a usable strategy. The guy's not going to hit 700. He's not hitting 90 home runs. So every, 10 at bats, he might hit a home run against you. But the Giants used to publish in their notes every day how many runs they scored when Barry walked. And it was like 30% of the time when he was walked, the Giants would score. It was not a practical strategy. It didn't work. And it was to the detriment of Barry, to the detriment of baseball as a whole, because you're taking the bat out of one of the greatest players in history, and fans are paying to see these guys hit. They're not paying for these guys to see them intentionally walked, so some team can have a strategy to win a game somewhere during the course of the season. And that was the argument. We're trying to win a game. I mean, give me a break. You're trying to win a game. I don't know how many arguments I had with Socha, who was a good friend too, and I covered when he was a player. I covered him all the way through his career managing the Angels. And I don't know how many arguments. And he'd always go, yeah, I know you hate intentional walks. And I go, yeah. I had this discussion with Boone this year about why do you think they did walk Barry all these times and they're not walking Judge? And then, one day he looked up at me after we're talking. He goes, that situation in the ninth inning, if I were them, they should have walked Judge in that situation. And they didn't. And I said, well, I'm glad they didn't. He goes, you didn't? He goes, I thought you liked intentional walks. I said, I don't. I hate intentional walks. If it was up to me, I'd legislate him out of the game. You have to
Really?
pitch the guy. You can't intentionally walk him. It's just stupid. There's no other sport, football, basketball, hockey, tennis. I mean, but team sports where you can take the bat, the stick, the ball out of the greatest players in those sports hands and negate what they do. In basketball, the closest thing is fouling a guy, but he still gets to the line and it can sink the two shots that you or the three shots that you negated by fouling him. In
Right.
baseball, when you take the bat out of a player's hands and walk him, there's no replacing that at bat. That at bat is over, and it goes down into your record book as a walk. And yet, it'll be great in this era for your on base percentage and your OPS, which is what general managers in the analytic era love. But I mean, it is not good for the fans who are paying the amount of money they are to see these games. So really, I'm glad that they haven't gotten around to taking the bat out of Judge's hands like that, although they have been walking him a lot recently.
It's true. Yeah, Aaron Judge is quite the player, and can only imagine what the sky is the limit with him. So let's go back to Pete Rose. Oh no, let's talk about Aaron Judge. Aaron Judge, what a tremendous player that he has been.
But let's put Pete Rose since we're on that, and then we'll get to Judge. How's that?
Yeah, that sounds good to me. Okay, let's go back to Pete Rose. Okay, he passed away, and obviously Commissioner Rob Manfred said, "Okay, well, I guess we'll let him. He's eligible to go back now because he's done." Do you think he ultimately does get in, or is it going to still take a while, even though he passed away, to get in
You
the
know, I,
hall?
I think it's going to have a lot to do with what the president of the United States does to put pressure on the Hall of Fame to vote him in, because
Really?
there's no question. And I'm not saying I know this as a fact. I'm just saying Trump said Pete Rose should go into the Hall of Fame. Rob Manfred met with Trump at the White House, and right after that, he took he took Rose off the restricted list, and then the Hall of Fame followed suit and said, since he's no longer on the restricted list, he's now eligible to be voted into the Hall of Fame. Now, I'm not saying that had anything to do with it. I'm just saying it's a curious run of events that led up to Pete getting off the restricted list. And actually, I thought right away when Pete died, he should have gone off the restricted list. In
Hmm.
his family asked him to do it, Manfred to do it, and he just let it sit there. What, Pete died in October?
Hmm.
They asked in January, and he just let it sit there until Trump said something about it. And so now, it's like, again, I'm not saying that that's why Manfred did it when he did it, but he should have done it as soon as Rose died, because there's no reason to have anyone who's deceased on baseball's restricted list, because the point of that is the restricted list is you can never participate in a baseball game or baseball activities again in any sort of capacity. Now, if you're dead, that's over.
Right.
Same thing for Shoeless Joe, anybody who's on the restricted
Hmm.
list. And yeah,
Okay.
everybody who was on the restricted list, along with Pete, got off the list. So now the question is, and my opinion is this: since
Okay.
Pete was never allowed to be on the BBWAA ballot, which I've voted for since 1992, I
Okay.
think, and I think Jason Stark agrees with me,
Hmm.
that Pete should go on our ballot, and his 15 years, which was his eligibility at the time on our ballot, should run first before he goes on these, veteran committee, error committee ballots. He was never given the chance. So
Okay.
now I don't. They're not going to do this. They already said they won't. But I think that would be the rightful thing to do, and give us a chance, just like we did with the steroid guys. If we want to vote him in, we vote him in. If we don't, we don't. And then he goes 15 years down the road onto whatever the the error system is going to be at that time, because they
Mm-hmm.
change it all the time. Just like they changed our thing from 15 years of eligibility to 10, to
Okay.
basically get the steroid guys off the ballot quicker, so they didn't have to deal with them anymore. So, I mean,
Wow.
you don't know what the rules are going to be, because the board of directors sits down and does what they want to do. Let me make it clear that even though the BBWAA votes for the hall and votes in players with 5 to 10 years of with 10 years of eligibility after 5 years of retirement,
Mm-hmm.
we have no say on how we do it, who we can vote for. We put together the names on the ballot. It gets approved by the hall. We then vote, but we've asked for a number of things, like having the ballot be transparent, so that nobody can not vote for Ichiro and not vote for for Jeter, and
Right.
basically not be accountable for it. We,
Right.
we have asked the Hall of Fame to do that, and they have turned us down. So the Hall of Fame controls this, even though we have the vote. And in fact, the Hall of Fame controls the fact that if we do not, they could remove us from the vote anytime they want. They
Okay.
they and turn it and develop an entirely new voting system. They are happy with it, because it's traditional and it's what's been done since the hall was basically created by Jane's grandfather back in the 1930s. It's been under the Clark family's auspices as a nonprofit since then, and they're a very traditional organization, and I think they like the way it is in the relationship with the BBWA. So I don't think it's going to change, but they could. The board of directors could change it at any time, and the board
Hmm.
of directors could change, the eligibility for Rose, and the eligibility for some of these, the error committees, which they do all the time. They've shortened the ballot. They've, it was 10 people on that ballot. Now it's 8. There are only so many votes to go around when you have 16 people on that committee. Every person on that committee can only vote for four, four guys, or 4 people. So, I mean, multiply it by 16. What is there? It's like 48 votes to go around. You need
Mm-hmm.
12 votes on the ballot. Really, you can't vote more than like 3 people in at a time. There's not enough votes to go around. And they could change that too. They could add people to the committee. They could take people away from the committee. It's just impossible to say, what lengths they'll go to restrict people's entrance to the hall. And I can tell you this because Jane has said this publicly. They are
Mm-hmm.
for a small hall. There are 20,000 or so people who have played Major League Baseball in all
Mm-hmm.
time, which is a very small amount of people, really. Only 200, 250 of those have gotten into the hall. That's like 1%. They want to keep it at 1%. They want to keep it as it really is a closed club, and it's a real honor to get into the Hall of Fame. So they're going to do whatever they're going to do to keep that pattern. And that's their ethos.
That's incredible stuff. It really is. I was actually surprised what you just mentioned that President Donald Trump voice is loud enough to make people really think about doing what they did. That just blows me away. And then you brought up an interesting point that I was going to ask you about anyway. It's called GMTA, Great Minds Think Alike. Very great stuff, man. It really is. I am baffled why Ichiro Suzuki and Derek Jeter never got 100% of the vote. It blows me away when they should have easily have gotten that.
And
I
yeah,
think,
and there could be 100 different reasons why that person didn't vote. You know, they didn't.
yeah,
They thought, oh, he's going to get. I'd rather put. I'm going to put 10 people on the ballot. They're going to get in anyway. I'm going to vote for somebody else.
yeah.
Or they could have like I had. I had a terrible relationship with Ichiro, and I wrote a column about it when I published my ballot. I publish my ballot every year, and when I wrote this year, I wrote the column about it. I listed all the Michigas things, nothing traumatic, that I had with Ichiro over the course of the years. And,
Yeah.
but I still said, I'm voting for Ichiro. It doesn't matter. He was such a good player. But I'm telling you, he's not going to get a unanimous vote because there's going to be some writer who's going to be pissed off. There could be a Japanese writer who was so pissed off at the way he treated the Japanese writers like crap. I watched it happen. And it's like, I knew there was going to be some. I thought he might not even get, he might do a junior and get like 95% or 96%, and there would be 5 or 6 people who didn't vote for him. That's where those relationships come in.
Hmm.
Each row, I had, a lot of fun stories with him. And when I saw him at the hall, I hadn't seen him in years. And he actually said, "Oh, I haven't seen you in so long." And he gave me a big hug, which I
Right.
was surprised. And it was like, okay, that's over. I'm fine with Ichiro now. But I mean,
Right.
the last time I interviewed him was
Hmm.
with a group of small people. And, he could speak, he did his Hall of Fame speech in English, which was terrific. He could do every interview he does live in English. He refuses to do that. He still uses an interpreter, even though the interpreter doesn't have to translate the question to him. He knows the question, but he answers it in Japanese to make the Japanese interpreter interpret it for us, which is just unholy hell during your career where you're trying, and you have to go through a tape and do all this stuff, and you don't know Japanese, what really is the answer, how are they homogenizing the answer for him, which is what he likes. But the last time, the Mariners had released him the year before because he couldn't play and hit anymore. So now they decide, he still hangs around, and they're opening the season in Japan against the Oakland A's, and they decide we're going to bring Ichiro back, and he's going to play his last 2 games of his career in Japan at the Tokyo Dome, and that's it. But Ichiro gets it into his head, and his agent John Boggs is a close friend of mine. Ichiro, we're out to lunch in San Diego during the off season. He goes, "You're not going to believe this. Ichiro is actually home training because he thinks he's going to try and make the team. He really wants to make the team." I go, "There's no way he's going to make the team." I go, "You know that, I know that, but I'm just telling you, this is what Ichiro. He's going to go to spring training and try to make the team." So
Hmm.
I go to spring training and I talk to Jerry DePoto, who's also a good friend of mine, the general manager, and I tell him this, and he goes, "Well, you can tell Ichiro he's not making the team. He's playing those 2 games in Japan, and that's it. That's the end of his career." So I go, "Okay, go back to Ichiro. He's doing his little scrum, and I ask him, it's been like 8 or 9 months since you actually swung against live pitching. Do you
Right.
think that's going to be a problem?" Without the guy translating the question, his answer in Japanese was, "What would it be like for you if you hadn't written a story in the last 8 months?"
Hmm.
And I looked at him and I go, "Let's put it this way, Ichiro. I've written a lot more stories in the last 8 months than you've had base hits."
That's funny.
And that's the last time I talked to him. And I vowed I would not talk to him again until he got into the Hall of Fame, which I
Wow.
did because I was just fed up with him. So yeah, that doesn't surprise me. Jeter does surprise me. There's absolutely no reason why anybody wouldn't vote. Jeter he wasn't the greatest interviewer in the world, but he was always accommodating, good or bad. He was pretty sanitized. He had it down. He didn't want to create any controversy in New York. He'd seen what had happened before to other players, and but he was always accommodating, and he was a great player to watch. And the Yankees only won the World Series 5 times with him captain. So I
Yeah.
mean, how do you not vote for him? Yeah, and he had what 3,200 hits or something,
Right.
whatever. It's like I don't know that's completely baffling to me, and I
Hmm.
just think that again, I'm transparent with my vote. Have the guts to be transparent with your vote. If you're not going to vote for the guy, hey, I'm so and so, and this is why I didn't vote for him. And if you're going to take a lot of hate mail and emails and text messages, and you're going to blow up on Zoom, and you're going to blow up on Twitter or X, and you're going to get chastigated by the fan base in general, well, then vote for him. That's up to you, but take the responsibility. This hiding behind an unanimous vote is just horrible.
Unbelievable. So let's go on to two more people. Then we're going to go to our first station break, and then we're going to transition over to some other current events in baseball. I love the Hall of Fame talk. Talking with a guy like you who's been voting since 1992. And I've been to the Hall of Fame a few times and dumped a little bit of money in there. And did a lot of videos the last time I was there. So if you can hang with a little bit, that would be appreciated because I have a lot of other important topics I want to get to, please. But let's talk about Don Mattingly and Mickey Lola. Don Mattingly first. I recently did an interview with him down in Miami when he was with the Blue Jays. Obviously, he's their bench coach. Don and he's a personal friend of mine. I also had a chance to interview Mickey Lolich. Do you think Don Mattingly belongs in the Hall of Fame?
I think he says he doesn't belong in the Hall of Fame. So I'll go with him on that. No, I don't think his career was long enough. Okay. And I think he was special at the apex of his career. But because of his back injuries and personal problems, he just didn't have a long enough career to get him into the Hall of Fame.
But he told me to. So what about Mickey Lolich? You talk about one of the best left-handed pitchers ever to pitch. And he won 3 games, obviously, in the '68 World Series. You look at all you have to do is look at his numbers to strikeouts a complete game, but yet he's not in there either. Maybe not enough wins. But what about Mickey?
I think that, look, he was off the ballot way before I was voting, and he's just from a completely different era. But all I can say to you is that as pitching has changed dramatically over the course of time, from when I started covering the game, and Maddox and Glavine and Schmaltz starred for those guys. Andy Pettit's not in the Hall of Fame. The guy has 250-something wins, and he has 19 playoff wins, the most in history. Does he belong in the Hall of Fame? He's getting no traction on our ballot. So, I mean, across time now, when you look at a guy like Lolich, he probably, of course, belongs in the Hall of Fame. And the pre-1980, era committee ought to take a good look at him because he's just the kind of guy that they're looking for to put into the Hall of Fame, where you can review his numbers now in the perspective of where pitching is now. A guy like Bert Blyleven, who spanned the eras. I didn't vote for Blyleven the first 10 or 12 years he was on the ballot. Then I started looking at it, and he had 15 years. And I looked at his shutouts, complete games, his wins and losses, strikeouts. It's like, why am I not voting for this guy? If this guy played in this era, he would never have these numbers. So I go, I'm voting for this guy. And I think in his 15th year on the ballot, he got in. And that's why when people ask if the guy doesn't get in on the first ballot, but he goes in on the 10th, what's different is his numbers haven't changed. No, but what changes, and which is the beauty of Hall of Fame voting, is that your perspective changes from year to year depending on what's going on in the current era of Major League Baseball and who's on the ballot against him in those particular years. I mean, there were years where, Hawk Dawson got in, where Barry Larkin got in, that if they were on the steroid ballots when people didn't have enough spots to vote, they would have never gotten in. But they were lucky in those years because there wasn't anybody of any sort of character and stability to get into the Hall of Fame. So, that's how they got in. Your vote stacks up against position. You never vote for a Hall of Famer if he's a third baseman and contrast him to an outfielder. You contrast him against the third baseman. And the same thing with a starting pitcher or a reliever. You contrast them against starting pitchers or relievers who are in the Hall. So should Lolich be in? I'm not looking straight at his numbers right now, but I'm sure cast against what's happened in Major League Baseball since then, he probably should get a look from, that pre-1980 era, candidate. And, and the Hall is always looking for people from that era because they think it's undermanned.
Great stuff. All right. Well, Lou Whitaker is a popular name that's not in there now. At some point or another, I believe he's going to get enough traction to join his Alan Trammell. Lou Whitaker, any thoughts on him?
Yeah, I mean, we didn't vote Trammell in. He got in by the Veterans Committee the year after he came off our ballot. So, yeah, I mean, definitely, just like, Utley and Jimmy Rollins are guys who, I vote for Jimmy Rollins. I vote for Utley. I mean, I think they had major impact in their careers at the positions they played. And I think Whitaker is another one. I mean, look at how many games he and Trammell played together.
All right.
It's incredible.
Okay. Well, let's talk about Aaron Judge. Unbelievable. This guy is just. I'm glad that he re-signed with the Yankees, and we finally have a chance to see a guy start in the same place where he finished. But Aaron Judge to me is an unbelievable player. What are your thoughts about Aaron?
Yeah, I think he's an unbelievable guy and an unbelievable player. And all you have to say about when you're talking about the MVP in the American League is just look at his OPS compared to everybody else. And the fact is, the mean batting average in Major League Baseball is like 245, and he's batting almost 100 points higher than that. And he's the only. There's only two or three or four players in Major League Baseball batting over 300. There's only one guy in the National League, but the last I looked, batting over 300. Even Freddie Freeman is under 300 at this point. Otani's batting 280. I mean, the guy is in another place. And when you talk about, I forget who it was I was talking to about. Maybe it was David Cohen, but they were telling me that the amazing thing about Judge's consistency is that he's so big, and to keep his mechanics in sync for a big guy the way he does, and do the same thing on every swing every day is really phenomenal. And when he gets out of sync, you can see it. That's when he goes into these long slumps. And so far, that's happened to him practically every year the Yankees have been in the postseason. But during the
Mhm.
regular season, you know, the guy hits home runs, drives in runs, steals bases. He's got an OPS over 200, man. Over the last three out of the last four seasons, he's had an OPS over 200. You know, the top OPS, I'm sorry, I mean OPS plus over 200. The top OPS in history is like Babe Ruth, and the top in for a single season is Barry, and Judge was above that this year.
Wow.
That's how good the player is.
Yeah, it really is. All right. Well, you talk about Shohei Ohtani. Like you say, he's on the shredders there. Guy can hit, he can pitch, he can do an awful lot. What else? What more can you say about Shohei Ohtani?
There's nothing you could say about him. He's, for what for this era. I mean, look, and I've written this too. Not even Babe Ruth did what he's doing.
Yeah.
Babe Ruth, there was no designated hitter back in that era. When
Right.
he played, there we had one season in 1919 where he pitched for the Red Sox and played the outfield every day he wasn't pitching. So he played about 130 games in the outfield. And as soon as he was sold to the Yankees for $100,000, the Yankees shut him down as a pitcher, and he played the outfield for the rest of his career. But he had four starts for the rest of his career with the Yankees, and he went
Hmm.
4-0 and barely let up a run. That's how good a pitcher he was. But Otani has never done. I mean, Ruth never did what Otani is doing now, which is pitching full seasons or half seasons and hitting, and he has the DH to his favor to be able to do that. So he's a singular player in baseball history. There's just no doubt about it.
What we're going to do now is we're going to go to our first station break. Scott Morgan, Motor City Mad Mouth, pleased to be joined by the Boomer, Barry Bloom. Barry Bloom is one of the iconic sports writers in all of sports writing history. I tell you one thing, I've been around a lot of them. No, in my opinion, I've read your stuff. I'm not gonna. You can laugh about it all you want, but the one thing I can say, and I appreciate you. But one thing I'll say this very sincerely: I've read your stuff. I don't care how old you are. If you can't learn from one of your colleagues, and shame on you. And that's what I've always learned about learning from people better than you are. And I know I'm complimenting you on live air streaming. All that new media business we're going to get to shortly. And folks, get out there and read Barry's stuff. You're going to learn an awful lot. And when I get around to writing my next book, this guy's going to end up in it anyway. So what's the difference? There's no way you're not going to hear about Barry Bloom anyways. But the Boomer and the Motor City Madmouth. We transition our first station break, but then when we come back, we're going to talk about today's baseball a little bit. We're going to get into CBA a little bit, the A situation, expansion, a couple other things. So stay with us here on the Motor City Madmouth show. Barry, please stick around. We're just getting going, but I'm glad that we talked a lot about the Hall of Fame at the beginning, because I think that's the one thing you've been able to do in this first hour, Barry, is be able to provide clarity on the process of voting, the Veterans Committee, and like that. And that's what so many people don't really understand about the idiosyncrasies of what goes on internally that they need to understand. And I think tonight you've definitely gone out there and shed light on that situation. Station break. When we come back, our next hour, we're going to talk about those things. Barry's going to promote a couple of books out there as well. So we're going to make sure you get plenty of the Boomer when we come back.
South Florida Tribune Publishing Company published a book, Lessons from the Microphone, Tuning into the Enduring Wisdom of Visionary Leaders. It is written by our host, Scott, the Motor City Madmouth Morganroth. Talks about Scott's 40-plus years in the business and how it has evolved. Old school media versus new school media. Get your copy today. It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kindle, Google, and Apple Books. There's also a link on our website, www.southfloridatribune.com, where there is a plethora of great other content, so go check it out. If you like to listen to podcasts, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to advertise, you can call Scott 954-304-4941. And if you want to be a guest or have topic ideas, you can always email us at southfloridatribune@gmail.com. Back to you, Scott.
All right, Candy. And Barry, next week, we're going to introduce a new series on No Limits called something to do with CTE. I have a bobsledder coming on and brain injuries. And since I'm dealing with my Alzheimer's situation, I feel anytime you're dealing with brain trauma and I have an opportunity to bring on something that helps other people benefit, that's something I'm looking forward to doing. And of course, I'm working with Mickey Callaway these days. He comes on Monday night on Inside 108 Stitches Baseball Talk, and I get him on Saturday as well. So I know you're good friends with him. So you want to say hello to him, I'm sure you can use that platform, and he'll definitely see this show when it's over with. That's for sure. But Mickey's a good guy. I've worked with him before, and it's really pretty cool when you have an opportunity to work with true baseball people, because baseball is all about relationships, and that's what I've learned over the years more than any other sports I've been associated with.
Yeah. Hey, Mickey. It's good to hear that you're doing well. Hope to see you again somewhere down the road. So, Scott, I'm in the situation here now where I can give you about another 15 minutes, okay?
That sounds good. So let's get to a couple of the major things. Let's talk about the CBA coming up. Do you think that this is going to get ugly? Well, with a potential salary cap looming.
No, I think it's going to be very much like the last time. I would hope that the owners would take a different tack to it, where they would go into bargaining and say, we would like some salary restrictions of some kind, a floor and a ceiling, and here's the math which proves that for all your players and the members of your unit, it'd be a good thing for you to have it, and then they can negotiate from a point of cordiality, where rather than from a point of anger. Because if the owners go into the collective bargaining again with the same tact that they've taken for the last 50 years and try to jam a salary cap down their throat, and when the union says no, which they will say no, then they'll lock them out again in the offseason, and then you're going to have a replay I do believe of what happened the last time. And when the season is about to start, most of the owners and most of the big market owners who have a lot of money invested in this are going to cave. You need 75% of the owners to do anything. And they're not going to have 75% of the vote to lock the players out into the regular season.
Right.
That's my opinion. I might be wrong. I talk to people, owners and baseball people, a lot about this, and this is what I'm getting from them. They just don't think that the owners have that kind of stick-to-itiveness to lock the players out into the season on the issue of the salary cap. There's too much money to lose.
Okay. Now, these next few topics are not going to take a lot of time, so we'll go through them in rapid fire format. How does that sound? Okay.
Good.
The A's heading to Vegas are in an interim situation in Sacramento. What are your thoughts about that? And then we'll touch briefly on the Rays Stadium as well. But let's talk about the A's. Obviously, you're on the West Coast.
I think the A's are a done deal. I went to Vegas during spring training. The Diamondbacks went up, played a couple of exhibition games at their minor league park. A lot of the Vegas officials were there. They hired a new club president at the time who helped get Allegiant Stadium done for the Raiders. I came away believing that the bid is very serious. I was told they were going to break ground in June. They did. They are now saying the stadium is funded. There was some other legislation that was passed yesterday, the permitting the building. They are now putting pylons in, and they say they have the money to do it. I think it's done deal. They're going to be playing there in 2028.
And what about the interim situation in Sacramento? I know a lot of complaints out of there, but
it's going to stay that way until they move to Vegas. They have no place else to go at this point.
And the Rays situation, like they played at Steinbrenner Field, they've made it work, and they're supposed to be back at the Trop. But I think the ultimate ending is going to be in Hillsborough County. Do you agree with I don't think they've done a decent job in St. Pete, but I know being a former Tampa resident, I think they'll be fine there. But what about the Rays?
Well, I mean, the key to the Rays is that, when Stu Sternberg stepped out of the last deal in Pinellas County, Major League Baseball forced him to sell. That's going to happen probably by the end of next week.
Right.
Once that's done, they already one of their club presidents is gone. I heard that Eric Nylander, their general manager, is terrific. He may be moving on. I don't know what the story will be with Cash, but the era of the way the Rays is being run is over once that happens, and they will now talk with people in in Hillsborough County to build a stadium over there. I think that's where the new ownership wants it, and I think it'll ultimately happen over there. I mean, Stu pulled out on two deals, one in Hillsborough and one in Pinellas, because he just didn't want to spend the money. And now you have new ownership with a lot more money, and I think ultimately, they're going to be playing. They're going to get into the Trop next year at some point.
Right.
They're shooting for early April.
Right.
Whether it gets there or not, they will be in there by contract. They have to play in the Trop for 3 more years. So they're in there through 2028 at this point. Mm-hmm. So 26, 27, and 28. So that gives them plenty of time to build a stadium and get it funded somewhere where it's going to be applicable for everybody. So I think you're going to see a total change in the Rays, and I think that's where it's going.
All right, now I need a brief prediction about expansion. Where do you think the next 2 cities are going to be?
It's a good question, and part of it is I look at the cities that are viable for expansion in Major League Baseball. When you're talking about the Charlottes and Nashvilles and Portlands, and they're NBA cities, they're NHL cities. Salt Lake City is another one. They're not Major League Baseball cities. They don't have the superstructure. They don't have the hotel space. Sacramento doesn't have the hotel space. And there was talk about, funding and building a stadium there. It's a $4 billion process, if not more. because you're going to have some city. There's no city except, ironically, Oakland that has a major league ready ballpark at this point. And so you're going to have to start from scratch in any one of those cities and build. That means some city is going to have to come up with the $2 billion to build a roof stadium, because I don't think you can build a stadium. And the same thing in Tampa. You cannot build not a stadium without a retractable roof in Tampa with the weather during the summer in Tampa. It should be a restriction now that any new stadium, because of climate change, anywhere in the country is built with a roof, whether it's a permanent dome or a retractable dome. The weather now does not permit not having a roof. You can't get any sort of like continuity in playing your games. So where they come up with that money, and then a $2 billion to $4 billion expansion fee, who's going to come up with that? So $4 to $6 billion to get it done. Which city's coming up with all this? So I go right now, to me, they're not going back to Oakland. They're not going back to Montreal. They have a history of doing this. Cities lose their teams. Seattle lost a team. They were right back in Seattle. Kansas City lost a team. They were right back in Kansas City. Washington lost a team. It took years, but they went back to Washington. New York, the Giants and Dodgers left. They went back to New York with the Mets. They've got a history of this. So you would think they might go back to Montreal or Oakland. They may be the best cities for most viable cities to do it if they can come up with money for a stadium. If Joe Lacob, who owns the Warriors, went to Major League Baseball and said, I'm going to tear down the Oakland Coliseum and build a new stadium right on that spot, and I'm going to fund the stadium myself, and I'm going to fund, buy the team, Major League Baseball might go back to Oakland. But it would take somebody like that with that kind of money to do it, and that kind of wherewithal and a track record of getting stuff done like Lacob does. But, I just don't see any place in the country where they're going to viably spend that kind of money. The NBA isn't doing it. They have two viable cities right now. They could move into Seattle and Las Vegas tomorrow. They have the arenas. They keep talking about building a basketball arena in Las Vegas. Yeah, that'd be great down the road, but you don't need it. You've got an arena. T-Mobile is just fine. I've covered two in-season tournament finals and semifinals there. It's a great place to watch basketball. So you could go in, but they don't want to do it. They don't want to split up the TV money. They don't want to start two teams from scratch. There's a lot of opposition in the NBA among owners to expanding. And I know that baseball owners like the idea of like divvying up the $2 billion that they're going to get from the expansion teams for selling those teams. But then the equivalent is they're going to wind up having to split up their national television money from 30 teams to 32 teams ultimately, even if they hold their feet to the fire like they did with Tampa Bay and the Diamondbacks and excluded them from the national TV money for a few years after they came in. I just don't see it viable, and I'll probably be wrong. There's always somebody who's foolish enough to step up with the money, but I just don't see it practically. It just doesn't pencil out.
So you're telling me you don't see any, the Nationals concerned. That's fair enough. If you don't feel there's any viable candidates, I'm totally fine with it. Some people do, some they don't. One important question, I only have two more questions to wrap it up and promote your books. So you don't see any viable candidates. I know Nashville, Utah, Charlotte have been brought up, but you don't see any of those because they have to start building a stadium before they can even look at it.
And they're all too demographically, they're too small. Okay. They're NBA cities and NHL cities. They are not NBA, Major League. They are not Major League Baseball or NFL cities.
Well, that's fair. That's totally fair. All right, let's talk about media access. This was really important. I want to make sure we got that on while we had a moment. I know it's been reduced. Obviously, the coverage has been compromised. I know COVID's had a lot to do in the past. Where do you feel that? What are your thoughts about media access being reduced these days? I know Tommy Gage and Bob Ryan have people that I've spoken to in the past aren't happy with it. They're kind of glad they got out when they did. But what about you're in it on a daily basis? Do you agree that media access has been reduced, and how much is that hurting the game, or what are your thoughts about it overall?
My feeling about it is that it could be better, but of all the sports, and I cover all of them, Major League Baseball is the best sport to cover, for media access. Whether you go into a locker room and you get 45 minutes before batting practice in every locker room, home or away. And
Okay.
the issue that we're dealing with now is let's get more people into the locker room to talk to, because they're in meetings, they're taking batting practice, they're doing all the stuff they need to do to prepare for a game, which I don't begrudge them. It's a tough job they have getting prepared and playing a baseball game. So I mean that's the only area in baseball I see. I think the I think the NBA, the NHL, and the WNBA is non-existent. But I think it's inadequate, and the NFL wants to restrict it even more than it is. NBA is not good, but it's better. There's no pregame access in the NBA anymore. Really, there's some, but players are really not around. They're preparing for the game by the time you get done with the coaches, and if there's any media access, there's nobody around. I don't know how go through and figure out having a player be available to do media interviews when their their mindset is to get prepared for the game, and they're under so much pressure and they have to digest so much information, and there's so many meetings and so many things that they have to take part in. And the same thing with the managers and the coaches. You don't have the time to really get to know these guys the way you used to either, because they go from one thing to the next. you know if I counted up in baseball something like 17 managers who are either in the front office or managers right now who I covered when they were players. And I have great relationships with all those people because I go back so far. But my access to some of them are minuscule. You can't get into an office and sit down with them and shoot the shit anymore the way you used to be able to do it. But, it's like that's part of the whole, process of what we're going through in the game. And, I'm not a day-to-day beat reporter. Maybe if I were a day-to-day beat reporter now as opposed to when I was, in the 1980s and early 1990s, I might complain about it. But for what I need, and the way I do my job, I can always get what I need, and I don't have any problems doing my stories. So I find that the media access could be better, but I don't have any real complaints about it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know that modern day communications person is different than what we're accustomed to, and it's a different generation, and they're asked to do a lot more things. So, do you feel that that is the case? And then the final question that we'll have for the night is streaming and the social media, and then you'll promote your books. But let's talk about the modern day communications and the streaming, then we'll wrap it up. What do they like to deal with?
I mean, it is what it is. You're talking to a guy who hasn't written for a newspaper since 1998.
Okay.
I mean, I went from the Union Tribune to Bloomberg to the MLB to basically Forbes to Sportico. I've been writing online for streaming services for since the late 1990s. It was the way it was going, and if you didn't recognize it and tried to hang on to your newspaper job, you were like you were at risk of becoming a dinosaur, which a lot of people did. It's where it's going. It's where TV's going. It's all it's all streaming. So it's just where it is. You have to adjust, just like I adjusted when I got into the business. I carried a little Olivetti typewriter with me. I pounded out stories. I handed it to a guy who transmitted it to whatever newspaper office I was writing for. It took 3 minutes to transmit the story. Then I worked on every generation of a computer there was until what I'm doing now on my MacBook. I mean, it's just transition. We're not horse and buggies anymore. We're not, the bicycle went out with the car. Things go out with other things, and you just have to adapt to it. And to stay alive in the business, you have to make adjustments and you have to adapt to it. That's all. I mean, I think I'm still around doing what I'm doing because I've adapted to it.
Smart. Finally, streaming, social media, that's a way of 2025. What are your thoughts about how everything's evolved to where we're at? I know NBC is getting back in the baseball business and streaming is more prevalent, but let's just combine the two, social media and streaming. That's a loaded subject there. Just give me your overall thoughts on it, and then after that, you can promote your books.
I mean, I only, use social media to print my, to really leak links for my stories, to talk about, things that are going on, to comment on things that are going on in the sports that I cover. I don't use it for personal things. I don't talk about my family. I don't talk about politics. I see no value in it at all. And when I first started on social media on Twitter, I used to get a lot of pejorative tweets back on things on my opinions and things I said. And right from the get go, I just said, you can have an opinion with whatever you want, with whatever I say or write, but you can't curse about it. And if you curse, I will give you one more try. And if you do it again, I will block you and ban you. You're never going to be able to talk to me again. And that's what I did. And some people, when I wrote that, they came back and apologized and said, "Gee, I'm really sorry. I got out of hand. I won't do it again." Other guys did, and I just blocked them. But after a while, I totally cleaned up my timeline. I don't get any of it. I don't get that stuff. I mean, there's algorithms that the way you write and what you answer to, the algorithms play to what you're doing, and so you can totally purge your entire Facebook page, your entire, X line by writing the way you want to write, and the algorithm keeps all the other garbage out. You just have to be smart about how you do it. That's all.
As far as streaming is concerned, I think it's incredible. You can watch these games anywhere you want. Don't you?
We just talked about that. Yeah, I agree.
Okay, good. All right, so finally, let's talk about your books. Talk about what you've written, what you're going to write, what's in the mix. And I can't thank the Boomer enough for being on tonight's Motor City Mad Mouse show. Barry Bloom, longtime friend of mine. I'm so glad that you were able to make it tonight, Barry. You're a great friend, and I can't thank you enough. But as we wrap this thing up, let's talk about the books you've written and what you're working on. And I know you have to get rolling, but thanks for being generous with your time tonight. You're totally appreciated.
I mean, the books, I wrote 2 books with Larry Boa back in the day. I wrote a Tony Gwynn book, which never seen the light of day, and I'm hoping to get published. Did half a book with Barry, which never got finished. I'm working on a book called the 1984 Padres, which, I've been researching and I've started to write. I've had a friend and I work on my memoir, which is, in the process. So I have a couple of books in the process, a couple of books that are out there. I did a couple of children's baseball books. I work full-time for Sportico, which is a sports business site owned by Penske Media. It's based in New York. You can put Barry and Bloom and Sportico into your Google search, and you'll get my column page with every column that I've ever written for Sportico, going back for years. So, and to stay current, that's what I would do. Just do that. And my Twitter is at Boomski, at BOOMSKIE. And that's pretty much the size of it.
Beautiful. Well, like I said, Barry, we have 2 authors, myself and you. And, I know you've done a lot of your coverage on the West Coast with the Padres. You talked about being in the Diamondbacks and the Giants. But in my opinion, you're an icon all over the country. And I'm just glad that we had an opportunity to get your story out there on our show tonight and talk about it. I've learned so much here from you on the show, and I can't thank you very much. I'm looking forward to when you come to Miami area that we're going to go out and have a nice steak in Fort Lauderdale. So as soon as you get to town, please think about me. We'll have a good time and build on the show. But Barry, thank you so much for being on the Motor City Mad Mouse show tonight. Candy, you could come on for a fast station break or goodbye, but I know Barry has to go. Thanks so much, Barry. You're a great friend, a colleague, and I can't thank you enough. You're just awesome partner.
Thanks, Scott. You're too kind. Stay in touch, please, and good luck with battling your Alzheimer's.
I appreciate Candy. Real quick, if you have to get going, that's fine. Candy will go ahead and wrap it up with a station break. Good night, Barry. Thanks so much for joining us.
See you guys. Thank you.
Good night.
South Florida Tribune Publishing Company published a book, Lessons from the Microphone, Tuning into the Enduring Wisdom of Visionary Leaders. It is written by our host, Scott The Motor City Madmouth Morganroth talks about his 40-plus years in the business and how it has evolved, old school media versus new school media. It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kindle, Google, and Apple Books. There's also a link on our website, www.southfloridatribune.com, where you can find a plethora of great content. Go check it out. If you see that red subscribe button in the lower right-hand corner, click it like a sheriff, and then turn on the notifications so you're notified anytime we go live. If you like to listen to podcasts, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to sponsor a show, you can call Scott 954-304-4941. If you want to be a guest or have topic ideas, you can always email us at southfloridatribune@gmail.com. But most importantly, I do also want to tell you that there is going to be a new series starting next week, Wednesday at 8 p.m. We are talking to a 1994 U.S. Olympic bobsledder who is trying to raise money for CTE and to help people that have CTE get treatment in a hyperbaric chamber, which is supposed to be very beneficial and very helpful. So come listen to his story and everything that he has to talk about, because I am like, we think of CTE I had never associated with bobsledding. So I'm looking forward to hearing his story. So again, next week, Wednesday on the South Florida Tribune YouTube channel, 8 p.m. Don't miss it. Back to you, Scott.
All right, Katie, give us a preview real quickly about Fire Up. We'll wrap it up in a moment. But meanwhile, great to have Barry Bloom on tonight, longtime friend of mine and an icon in all of sports.
On Fire Up, we are going to be talking football and more football and more football, and probably a little MLB playoffs since they're going to be starting soon, and there's a couple of teams that have clinched playoff spots. So tune in a little while. We'll probably go on live around 9:30 or so.
All right, well, that does it here for the Motor City Madmouth Show. Glad to be joined by Barry Bloom, the Boomer, and the Motor City Madmouth tonight. And I look forward to being able to build on. We have our baseball show on Saturday with Mickey Callaway. And, of course, I'll be a special guest on New York MLB Talk tomorrow night. Be a good show at 10 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. I have a busy schedule. And, of course, with the Florida Gators, Miami Hurricanes over the weekend. So on behalf of the Boomer, Barry Bloom, my name is Scott Morgan off the Motor City Madmouth, and Candy Ebling as well for joining us tonight. And we'll see you on the next episode on Saturday when Mickey and Eric Katz, go live and talk some baseball. Have a good night, everybody, and Fire Up is next. Bye now.